A 10% tariff imposed by the United States on imports from the United Kingdom and the European Union is presented as the trigger for a deep rupture in the global silver market. This so-called Greenland Tariff does not operate as a simple trade friction. Its impact goes far beyond making the metal more expensive. According to the analysis, it alters the very architecture that has allowed silver to circulate freely between the world's major financial centers for decades. The global silver market has functioned on the basis of a delicate balance. Banks and large intermediaries have relied on arbitrage mechanisms to move metal between New York and London, maintaining a relatively uniform price and ensuring liquidity on both sides of the Atlantic. That system depends on one essential condition. The physical movement of silver must remain economically viable. The tariff breaks that condition. By introducing a direct cost on transatlantic flows, it turns what was once a neutral operation into a penalized transaction. The result is not a minor price distortion, but a functional blockage. From the outset, the video argues that this change does not merely affect the market. It transforms it. Silver ceases to behave as a fully global asset and begins to act like a resource constrained by borders and national policies. This introduction establishes the core framework of the analysis. The problem is not only that prices may change, but that the system designed to absorb stress and redistribute metal has stopped working. From this point forward, the market enters a different phase where previous rules no longer guarantee balance or continuity. To understand the scale of the impact, the video first explains how the so-called location swap works, the key mechanism that has supported stability in the international silver market. For years, major banks have used this system to move physical silver between New York and London, depending on where demand was concentrated. When London needed metal, silver could be shipped from inventories linked to COMEX. When pressure shifted to the United States, the flow could reverse. This constant exchange maintained balance and prevented visible price breakdowns. The central element of this mechanism was not the price of silver itself, but transportation cost. As long as moving metal from one center to another remained economically viable, the system could absorb temporary imbalances without showing fractures. The location swap functioned as a pressure valve. It allowed shortages in one market to be offset by surplus in another, sustaining the appearance of a unified, efficient global market. The 10% tariff destroys that logic. By adding an extra cost to transatlantic movement, the exchange ceases to be neutral. Bringing silver from London to the United States, or returning it from New York, becomes a direct financial loss. According to the video, this is the exact point where the system breaks. Banks can no longer move metal freely to close supply gaps. The tool that kept COMEX and the LBMA aligned becomes useless overnight. Without that mechanism, prices stop communicating with each other. Silver no longer flows to where it is needed, but to where it can remain without penalty. A market that once operated as an interconnected network begins to fragment. And this fragmentation is not gradual, it is immediate. With the location swap neutralized, any local tension can no longer be absorbed by the global system. Each center becomes dependent on its own available metal. This forms the technical foundation of the video's main argument. The tariff does not merely make silver more expensive, it breaks the system that allowed the market to function. With the location swap disabled, the video introduces a concept that clearly captures the new market dynamic, the Roach Motel effect. The analogy is straightforward. Silver can enter the United States, but leaving becomes practically impossible without absorbing a significant penalty. The tariff acts as a one-way trap. Metal flows into the U.S. market, but becomes stuck once it crosses the border. This change completely alters incentives. Market participants no longer evaluate where silver is most needed, but where it can remain without generating additional losses. The United States becomes a point of accumulation, not because of abundance, but because of restriction. The video emphasizes that this effect is not theoretical. It is a mechanical consequence of the tariff. Any attempt to re-export silver from the United States back to London is punished by the added cost, discouraging intermediaries from making that move. The result is an asymmetric market. Silver concentrates on one side while the other becomes progressively isolated. This phenomenon breaks one of the core assumptions of global metals trade, fungibility. Silver stops being interchangeable between financial centers and becomes conditioned by its physical location. According to the analysis, once this effect takes hold, it is not easily reversed. Every ounce that enters reinforces the imbalance and further reduces the system's ability to self-correct. The Roach Motel is not just a catchy metaphor. It describes a market that has lost its ability to redistribute metal and now operates under rules fundamentally different from the past. The most immediate and severe impact of this new structure appears in London. The video describes the LBMA as a market that was already under extreme pressure before the tariff was introduced. Demand from India and China had significantly reduced the availability of physical silver in London. In that context, the LBMA relied on steady inflows from New York as a critical backstop. This was not a secondary source, but an emergency mechanism. The tariff cuts off that access. With the location swap disabled and the Roach Motel effect fully active, London becomes isolated from its primary relief valve. Silver that could previously be mobilized from COMEX to cover local deficits is no longer available. The video argues that this disconnection places the LBMA in an extremely vulnerable position. Shortage stops being a manageable issue and becomes a systemic risk. Without access to additional metal, the London market faces the possibility of failing to meet physical delivery obligations. This opens the door to a scenario once considered remote, a physical default. This is not a conventional financial failure, but an inability to deliver promised metal. In a market that has operated for decades on trust and continuous settlement, this represents a fundamental rupture. The analysis stresses that the problem does not arise from a sudden collapse in demand, but from the disappearance of the mechanism that once balanced it. Isolated, the LBMA shifts from a global hub to a regional market with finite resources. The tariff does not just alter flows. It reshapes the hierarchy of markets and places London in a position of fragility it has not experienced in the recent past. With London isolated and New York becoming a point of accumulation, the video explains that the next inevitable effect is market bifurcation. The concept of a single global silver price begins to break down. Until now, arbitrage between COMEX and the LBMA ensured that any price difference was temporary. Metal moved to close the gap, and equilibrium was restored. That mechanism no longer exists. With the tariff in place, silver cannot move freely to correct discrepancies. As a result, New York and London stop reflecting the same physical reality. The video points to the emergence of two distinct silver prices, one in the United States, backed by metal trapped inside the country, and another in London, shaped by increasing scarcity and no access to emergency external supply. This separation marks the practical end of a unified global spot price. Price ceases to be a universal reference and becomes a local signal determined by regional availability. The analysis emphasizes that this change is not cosmetic. It carries deep implications for contracts, hedging strategies, and valuations that for decades assumed an integrated market. Once bifurcation takes hold, each market begins operating under its own internal stresses. Silver is no longer just silver. It is silver in New York or silver in London, with different values and different risks. According to the video, this is one of the most critical rupture points introduced by the Greenland Tariff. It does not destroy supply or demand, but it eliminates the bridge that connected them globally. Indirectly, the tariff creates an effect the video describes as unexpected but decisive: the formation of a de facto domestic strategic silver reserve in the United States. By making exports prohibitively expensive, silver entering the country stops circulating outward. This is not an explicit policy decision, but an automatic economic consequence. The metal stays where it is not penalized. This transforms the United States into a zone of forced accumulation. Every ounce that enters adds to an inventory that can no longer be freely redistributed to the global market. The video notes that this dynamic strengthens the domestic supply chain for a metal considered strategically important. Without declaring formal restrictions, the tariff ensures that silver remains inside the country. From a strategic perspective, this reduces U.S. exposure to external disruptions. Access to silver becomes more predictable domestically, even as other markets face shortages. This stands in stark contrast to London's position. While the LBMA is isolated, the United States consolidates relative security based purely on the economic impossibility of exporting metal. The analysis argues that this redefines the country's role in the global market. The U.S. stops being just a financial hub and effectively becomes a reservoir. The Greenland Tariff does not just break international arbitrage. It reshapes physical distribution and alters strategic balances between regions. Another direct consequence of the tariff appears in the final price paid by buyers of physical silver within the United States. The video explains that even if the spot price remains stable, the real cost of silver rises through expanding premiums. As imported, silver becomes more expensive. Bars and ingots arriving from abroad carry embedded costs that do not disappear. They are passed directly to the buyer. As a result, premiums on physical silver widen. The reference price may remain unchanged, but the effective acquisition cost increases. This creates a growing disconnect between the spot market and the physical market. The silver shown on screens no longer represents what it costs to secure an actual ounce. The video emphasizes that this matters most for investors and industrial users. It is irrelevant what futures prices display if physical metal requires paying an ever higher premium to obtain. Rising premiums also reinforce the incentive to hold existing domestic silver. Each available ounce gains relative value as replacement becomes more difficult. The tariff therefore introduces a silent but persistent pressure on the U.S. physical market. It does not cause an immediate spike in spot prices, but it raises real costs and reduces supply elasticity. This further solidifies market fragmentation and prepares the ground for a system where visible prices and real prices diverge structurally. At this stage, the video argues that the market enters a new era of regional pricing. Silver stops being valued as a metal with a single global price and begins trading based on physical location. With international arbitrage blocked, each region depends on its own inventories and constraints. Price ceases to be universal and becomes local. In this environment, the U.S. market emerges as relatively secure, not because of unlimited supply, but because metal entering the country is protected by the economic barrier of the tariff. Silver inside the United States cannot be easily drained. The video clarifies that this relative security does not imply lower prices, but greater domestic predictability compared to external volatility. Other markets, particularly London, remain exposed to increasing stress without backup supply. This transition marks a profound conceptual shift. The value of silver is no longer defined solely by the metal itself, but by where it is stored. Location becomes a determining factor in price. The analysis explains that in a regional pricing system, comparing prices across markets loses meaning if metal cannot move to close the difference. The Greenland Tariff accelerates fragmentation and transforms the market's logic. Silver enters a phase where access and jurisdiction matter as much as nominal price. The Greenland Tariff does not destroy demand for silver, nor does it eliminate its usefulness. What it does is far more fundamental. It breaks the mechanism that held the global market together. By blocking arbitrage between New York and London, the tariff transforms an integrated system into a fragmented network of regional markets. Silver stops circulating freely and becomes trapped by economic borders. The result is a structural shift. The spot price loses its role as an absolute reference, and focus shifts to replacement cost and local availability. The video stresses that in this new environment, security is no longer measured only by price, but by location. Where the silver is matters as much as how much exists. For market participants, the conclusion is clear. Ignoring the spot price and watching the physical market becomes essential. Premiums, inventories, and regional restrictions now define reality. This is not a temporary disruption. It is a system reconfiguration. Silver does not disappear, the rules change, and those rules are no longer global.